What's up guys, I'm Fowler. Today we're going to go through the project file for the track that JELO and I made called My 303 Wants to Bang Me. We made this track specifically to play on a big sound system down at a festival in Michigan called Grid Life, and I'm going to go through why and how we did things the way we did them for that sound system. Before we get into it though, if you're a producer, I would suggest hopping on my Discord server. I share all the stems and some of the project files for the tracks that I release on there. There's also a healthy community of producers and musicians who are constantly sharing ideas, giving feedback, etc. We also play video games every Thursday, and I do a production feedback stream every Friday. So if you really want to get involved with the Fowler community, it's on Discord. Head over there. All right, my friends, here we are in FL Studio. This is the project file for My 303 Wants to Bang Me. I started this on my laptop in Toronto right before JELO and I went down to Michigan to play that festival. I named it Thoughts Are Good. I don't know. I had no idea what the track was going to be about when I started. And I just started with this idea of a synth because I know JELO loves acid bass lines, loves old school rave kind of music. You know, he was producing in the 90s and DJing in the 90s. So he kind of came up on that stuff. So I think what I was doing was going for like an acid bass line to hopefully inspire an idea in JELO so that we could create something together. So what I did was I opened up Serum and I started messing around with, it's a fairly simple synth. So if we listen to it, so basically what we have here is like the acid waveform. This LFO is modulating the wavetable position of it, and we're also getting a little bit of FM synthesis from oscillator B, which let's see what's controlling that. Nothing actually. That's cool. So I started coming up with like this kind of weird and wonky acid bassline sound to show Josh, JELO. And he somehow came up with the idea. He said, hey, what if it said My 303 Wants to Bang Me? And I was like, I don't even know what to say to that. Yes, of course. Yes, this is what the song is called now. It's called My 303 Wants to Bang Me. I don't know what it's going to be like. I don't know, but it's going to have acid bass lines and it's going to be banging. Now we have this idea of like the personification of the 303 classic Roland synthesizer. So I loaded up this freeware 303 clone on my laptop. I don't think I have it installed on my studio PC, but I sent it into an Edison and I hit record and I just started messing around with it. And as you can hear, there's lots of cool stuff in there. I do this quite often. I'll hit record on something and I'll just mess around. And then that gives me all kinds of cool little bits and pieces to chop out and use as accent. Or sometimes I even come up with a full riff or idea, and because I've been recording the entire time, I can go back and cut it out and elaborate on that idea. So I don't know exactly which parts of this I used, but my goal was I'm gonna hit record for like 3 minutes, and I'm just gonna mess around on this 303 and record it. That part's definitely used at some point. That's what I did to come up with these acid bass lines. So if we listen to the start of the track, let's mute the vocals for a sec. So you can see I'm going through and I've cut out all these little bits and pieces and created these little accent kind of calm response moments. The next thing I want to talk about is the fact that it's in the key of C. Originally, it was probably in the key of E or F or something like that, but I said, you know what? We're going to be playing on an insanely good sound system down at Grid Life. Cascade was headlining. You know, they had Joyride, Kavinsky, they had all these big names. So you knew they were going to have some good sound systems. So I said, fuck it. C is typically too low of a key to write bass music in because it's really hard for most speakers to represent that bottom fundamental frequency of C. You know, like C sharp, D, that's kind of getting down there for low frequencies. But I said, hey, this sound system's gonna rock, let's do it. So we pushed the key of the song down to C, and we wrote it in C with the hopes that the subwoofers were gonna be able to recreate that. Let's have a listen to the drop real quick.
3 wants to bang me. To bang me. To bang me. To bang me. 3 wants to bang me. To bang me. To bang me. To bang me. 3 wants to bang me.
So you can hear it's very, very low. But one thing I tried to do to make sure that even if you don't have like a real banging subwoofer, you still get to hear that fundamental note. Let's have a look at the sub bass real quick here. As you can hear, it's very dirty. You know, it's not even close to being a pure sine wave. It's actually quite complex for a bass sound. I'm kind of remembering myself how I did this one. So we start off, it's mostly this distorted kind of broken up sine wave, and then this to me looks like it was a sawtooth that I pulled the fundamental out of. That's exactly what it is, to give it that kind of a little bit more of those harmonics. Then we filter it down, but it's not filtered down super steep. It's only, you know, 12 dB per octave, so it's really just maybe getting rid of the clicks and stuff. No effects or anything. So then it comes into a low pass filter. Then after the low pass filter, it's getting distorted quite heavily. That's adding even more harmonics, right? And then this is kind of shaping the sound. This is what I had to do to make it fit in the mix right. But typically speaking, what I'm doing is I'm creating a somewhat harmonic rich sub bass. Then I'm filtering it down so some of that harmonic richness is leaking through the filter. Then I'm filtering that down again, distorting it to add in some more harmonics, and then shaping all those harmonics together to fit in the mix properly. And the result is a dirty sub bass that has a lot of bottom end to it, but it also, if you high pass or if you listen to it on a phone, you can still hear the sub bass going because of those high harmonics. And then again, I'm going back and using little clips and snips of me messing around with the 303. That's what all these things are. Every once in a while, I'll manipulate it. Like you can see this one right here is actually a different clip, and I time stretched it so that it fits the little phrase there. It fits the vocals that are saying wants to bang. So if we listen to the vocals. Okay, so we covered the 303 sounds. Let's talk about the drums a little bit. Here's the intro drums. Let's have a listen. So right off the bat, we have a very small kick drum. Just enough to kind of give you the idea of where the downbeat is, right? But it's really just a click, and it's a top kick that I've just like filtered all of the... I filtered that like tail off of it. Then we have some dirty loop that I've cut up. So it's very basic, kind of dirty, techno-y drums, which I'm a big fan of. I think it fits the vibe of the track a lot. As we're getting closer to the drop, as it builds up with the risers and whatnot, we have the snare drum roll, just a very basic kind of rise in both pitch and volume. Okay, now let's have a listen to what happens in the drop. So it's actually two kick drums playing off of each other, both going into distortion and a bit of shaping. Now let's have a listen to this snare. I love those like almost lo-fi shitty sounding snares. Those are pretty much my favorite snares always. Then we do the classic, you know, fade into every other snare. That's pretty much it for the drums and the drop, at least at this section, right? It's very basic because it's really trying to drive home. It's almost like I'm making a statement. I'm being like, hey, here is the beat. And then we'll elaborate on the beat, you know, like, hey, this is what's going to happen. And then after we've established this is what's going to happen, then we can elaborate, get more complicated, recontextualize, all that good stuff. It sounds dope. I could just listen to that drum loop for quite a while, not to toot my own horn. Okay, so now we're into the second section of the drop where things step it up a bit. Let's have a listen to it with the whole mix. So let's talk about the drums again. Now that we're into this kind of elaboration or like the next progression of this beat, we're going to bring in some more top drums. So let's listen to just the drums again. So we brought in some of the techno-y drums from before. We didn't use all of them because we're kind of holding some of them back for a later part in the track, but let's have a listen. The thing I love about this drum beat is it almost has a melody to it. It almost has a hook to it. It's like dum ba dum bum ba dum dum bum ba dum bum ba dum bum. I love that kind of call and response. It's more than just kind of forward to the floor beat. It's got it's almost like talking to you in a way. Okay, so now let's move forward. Now we're in the last part of the first drop. Let's have a listen to what the drums do specifically. We finally get those open hi-hats. You know, we finally get like the staple of this style of music, the open techno-y kind of hi-hats. So now that we know what the drums have done throughout the drop, let's take a listen to how we've stepped it up in terms of the musicality and the stuff that's happening besides the drums. So there's one main element that comes in. And it's kind of funny where it came from. Let's have a listen. So we got this, I think it was originally a riser. Yeah, it's actually this riser. So like this was just like a cool riser sound that I enjoyed, and there were some specific parts in it that I really liked, and I like doing this a lot. I'll go and I'll find little pieces of audio, you know, whether it's a riser sample, whether it's a time-stretched clap sample, finding little moments and then creating something new out of those moments. That's something that I love to do in my music. It's what I have the most fun doing, so I tend to do it quite often. So that's kind of given that call. There's a lot of call and response. I do this a lot in my music. So let's listen to what the call is and what the response is. And within this call and response, we have another call and response. This is a call. This is a response. So that gives us almost like a fractal of calling and responding. You know, there's calls and response on a bar by bar measure or a measure by measure. There's different layers to it. And I love doing that. There's also the vocals that are doing part of the call and response. So let's find the vocals real quick right here. So they are also responding to this. Right? So to bang me, that's also a response. It's easy to kind of get overwhelmed and add too much shit to the point where it's no longer really saying a phrase, it's just a bunch of noise. But what I try to do is find elements that you know, you might have 2 or 3 elements that all play together and the listener hears it as one element. So to me, this and this sound like one element. Let me play just those 2 things together real quick. Instead of it being like 2 elements, it sounds like like it sounds like it's almost one impossibly complex synthesizer playing this one line. And then if you mix that in with this synth part, you have this cool call and response relationship between all of these parts. So let's listen to the whole thing in the context of the mix again.
Wants to bang me.
So again, with the call and response, you got call, response, but then you also have call and response, and then you have, call and response. I don't know. I don't really even do this consciously. It just kind of happens. That's, to my brain, that's what makes sense when I make my music. Okay, let's talk about the vocals real quick. This is a recording of me just speaking my 303 Wants to Bang Me, and I specifically remember doing it in one take and just being like, okay, that's it. Sometimes I like to challenge myself like that. I'll just be like, I'm just gonna record myself saying this line, and it's gonna sound shitty, but I'm gonna have to make it sound not shitty with effects and editing, and that drives me kind of in a creative direction out of necessity, right? So I recorded it. I don't have the original recording. I think I did it in a different project, and then I don't really remember, but it's not in this project for some reason. So before we get into the effects that's happening, this is the pitch bend.
303 wants to bang. My 303 wants to bang. My 303 wants to bang.
It's going between C sharp and C, which are the notes that are happening a lot in the track. It's kind of doing that one semitone, evilly kind of sound thing, right? So it's pitch bending between C sharp and C.
303 wants to bang.
Okay, then it's going into stereo savage, which is kind of like a cheaty stereo imagifier kind of thing. I don't really like using these things, but you can kind of get away with it a little bit on vocals. And this is, you can see it's very subtle. I mean, we're talking like maybe 10% of the effect. Let's turn it off and on.
303 wants to bang. My 303 wants to bang.
It's very, very subtle. It's just adding like a little bit of width. That's it. Okay, then we go into just your typical high pass, boosting the highs a little bit to make it brighter. Going into my favorite vocal strip. It's a VX64 vocal strip. It's getting compressed very heavily, but that's all that this thing is doing. Then goes into another EQ to cut some more lows and shape it a little bit. I probably could have done that in the same EQ, but oh well. So it goes into this Echo Boy, but it's honestly doing very little. I'm kind of like relearning this project as I go. I'm like, why did I put this Echo Boy on there? Well, it's adding a little bit of stereo width. If I play it and I'll just turn the mix knob up.
3 wants to bang me. My 303 wants to bang me.
So again, it's just tickling the stereo field a little bit, it's very subtle. All right, it comes out, goes into OTT for a little bit of OTT-tification.
3 wants to bang me. My 303.
Which pushes up more of those high ends, makes it sound crispier, all that good stuff. Then it goes into just very subtle, extremely subtle reverb.
3 wants to bang me.
Very short, very low in the mix, but it just fills in the gaps a little bit, right? And then last but not least, it gets de-essed so that the S's are less harsh on the ears. Let's have a listen.
Wants to bang me. My 303 wants to bang me.
Part of boosting these high ends is now the S's are going to be like war crime territory, right? So this de-esser is, now that I'm listening back to it, it's maybe a little too de-essy because it almost sounds like the vocals have a lisp.
Wants to bang me. My 303 wants to bang me. My 303
It's like right on the edge of having a lisp. Like if I turn this up more, you'll hear what I mean.
wants to bang me. My 303 wants to bang me. My 303 wants to bang me.
It's very Mike Tyson if you go too far. So be careful when you're de-essing. You want to find that balance where you don't really hear the de-esser. It's just less harsh when the S's happen. If you're hearing the de-esser work, you're doing it wrong. I was kind of on the wrong side of right when it came to this. It's not bad, and in the mix you can't really tell. But if I were to go back and fix anything in the mix, I'd probably go and fix that de-essing and turn it down just a tad. All right, so we've covered 303 bass line, we've covered the drums, we've covered the vocals. Let's talk about the effects a little bit. I have a lot of effects risers. I like to mix them with my own sounds. I don't think there's anything wrong with using these samples, but I think mixing them in interesting ways so that you're not just using like a straight up riser from a sample pack and that's it. I like to build risers out of synths or tweak things, add reverb, tune things up or down or whatever, find ways of making risers that are more interesting than Cymatics riser number 69. Let's have a listen to what I'm talking about. So sometimes I still use Massive. I know it's not 2008, but this is what I cut my teeth on, so I'm still very comfortable using this synth for making, utility sounds, you could call them. So this is part of the riser effects as we're getting close to the drop. It's getting mixed with other riser effects. Let's go turn some of those on as well. So as you can see, mixing your own sounds with other sounds from sample packs, that's a way of still getting like all of the good tastiness from the sample packs that you love and the riser sounds that you love, but you're adding some unique touch. You're adding your own flavor and your own sonic fingerprint on it by creating even just that little, I call it like the medical noise. It sounds like a heart rate monitor or whatever, you know, before it flatlines. I created that in Massive and I layered it with a bunch of other stuff. Automating reverb, getting more washed out, you know, pitch shifting things up. It's all great ways of supplementing each other and not just relying on one build-up sample. This track is honestly pretty straightforward compared to a lot of the shit that I make that's way overcomplicated. So that's basically it for the effects. Let's see what else is going on here. So now we are in the breakdown section here. Let's have a listen real quick. As you can hear, the track has gone through 3 sections of drops, and now we're kind of in like the, okay, give us a break for a second, right? But as we're building up, you'll hear that I'm fading in something. Listen to this. So, as I'm building this, it's almost like a bait and switch. You know, we have this 303 section. And then it switches out to this like pseudo, I call it the drunk 303. And it's just like kind of silly. Like it's like, what the fuck is this synth? It's got a lot of silliness to it. I don't know what it is about it, but it just makes me feel like it's a drunk Roland 303. Anyway, let's have a listen. Okay, now we bring back in that kind of, that ravey dump, bump, dump, dump, like that. I don't even know what you would call that. I think I made that phrase kind of accidentally when I was chopping up that riser sound, this thing here.
3 wants to bang me.
Now, here's another trick that I use sometimes when I want to amp things up. You know, I'll bounce this effects thing. Let's have a listen again right here. And then I will pitch shift it up an octave and add it to it. Or down an octave, I guess, in this case. And an interesting thing that's happened too is instead of us having this as the initial, we have the word bang, and it's replacing the initial bam, 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 ba-da. We have bang, bam, bam, ba-da. So again, we're shifting between elements and creating phrases using numerous elements, but squishing them into one kind of cohesive sentence, if you will. It's almost like, imagine typing out a sentence in Microsoft Word, but the words are kind of in different fonts. Like it's still a sentence and you can still read it as an idea or a phrase, but the words, maybe you have Comic Sans for the first 2 words, then you have like Arial bold for like 3 words, and then the last word is in Webdings or something. Like it's still a cohesive sentence, but you've made it out of different fonts. And that's kind of the way my brain works when I'm creating phrases like this. This song was a lot of fun to make. Josh and I both laughed a lot. So we're getting into the outro section, and what we're doing is we're bringing back in that medical sound that I would call that massive riser. Which is nice because if you'll notice, the drum beat is very kind of dun 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 dun. It's not down, 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 down. It's not forward of the floor per se. It kind of is, but it's got two kick drums doing a complex rhythm. So it's nice to have this riser medical sound driving home that downbeat, right? It like gives your brain something to latch onto to keep time. So that medical sound really drives home the idea of, hey, this is the downbeat, motherfucker. You know, that's the point of that. Of course, as we're getting closer to the section, we're opening up the reverb. And then we're kind of into like the DJ outro section. Honestly, that's pretty much the track. This was a fun track to make, but it was also a very simple track to make, and we crammed it out pretty quick. I want to say we had a playable version in probably like 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, but probably 2 hours. The track that we played at the festival was probably about 2 or 3 hours worth of work done to it. And it really rattled some bowels, if you know what I mean, when we played it. That sound system really did its job producing that C note. It was quite impressive, honestly. So that's the breakdown of My 303 Wants to Bang Me. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. I hope you learned something, and if you do, feel free to subscribe. Check out my channel. There's quite a bit of other resources there, and maybe you might learn a couple things or two. If you haven't already, go check out My 303 Wants to Bang Me. The link is in the description. Feel free to share it with some friends if you think they're into that sort of thing. I'm going to be doing a lot of self-releases this year, so I'm really relying on you guys to put in just a little bit of work to help the algorithms know that, hey, maybe you like my music, and hey, maybe your friends might like my music. I really, really appreciate it, and I love you. See you in the next video. Bye.